Hey everyone, my name's Gunther, and welcome back to Sakura Zoo and a little bit of a different episode. We are doing a habitat, it's going to be for the Amur Leopard, but we're also starting a new section which I've kind of started calling the Mountains of Asia, which is always exciting when you start a whole new section for your zoo. So to start off, as with any type of section, we need some way to teleport our guests from one section of the zoo to another one. And I'm not talking like an actual ride or anything like that. I just want some way that we can kind of denote that we are leaving maybe the temperate area of our zoo into a taiga-themed area of our zoo. And this is exactly what we're working on. A lot of the inspiration for this actually came from Toronto Zoo, because I was just there recently in November, and I love how they have their lion habitat set up. You actually go under this faux rock mountain, and it looks really cool, and kind of want to emulate that here as well. So really, that just means a ton of faux rock, which in my eyes makes sense for something like this, because this is going to be custom built with an intent to transport our guests from one section to another. Now, I am focusing on creating as much of a smooth surface as possible, because at the end of the day, this is what it's going to look like. I'm really going to have some doors sunken into the wall. It's going to lead to maybe some power generation rooms or just some storage, general maintenance, what have you. Now, with that out of the way, it's time to start kind of this entrance plaza, if you will, for the Mountains of Asia. And it's not really a large plaza. We just want some kind of feature here that's going to welcome our guests into this section. And when you think of Japan or Asia and mountains, you kind of think about water. I don't know, in my eyes, that kind of works. So to that end, went back through, added in some additional faux rocks and even more mulch, and kind of really liked how this is starting to come together. Now, because we are in a new section of the zoo, it does mean that we get to change our building style, which is going to be a lot of stone. It's going to be a lot of stone and concrete, and that's by design. These are the mountains of Asia, so we're not expecting to see a lot of really cool modern looking buildings. We want everything to be sort of brutalist concrete stone. That's going to be the theme for this entire area. Thankfully, the East Asian pack does come with these awesome looking stone barriers, these little fences. Works wonders for this overall build, and so I'm just going to utilize those. You're going to see a lot of them crop up throughout this entire area. Now, from a foliage perspective, kind of going less is more, making sure that we can still see the mulch through, because this is very much a man-made pool of water, so we don't need to go too heavy from a foliage perspective. And I like to think the end result definitely speaks for itself here. Lots of foliage, lots of color, really fits with the theme, the Mountains of Asia. All right, maybe we've kind of skimmed over that initial section pretty quickly. The entire idea behind it is I wanted to give you a little bit of a backstory of what this entire habitat area is going to look like. You can kind of see it all come together. But now it's finally time for us to start working on our Amur Leopard habitat. And I really like how this turned out. Again, we're going for that brutalist theme here. Saw a little bit about that in our previous episodes, but we're really leaning into it in this area because we have the option and the ability to do so. It's part of the joy of going and building all these new sections for your zoo. So our guest barrier, super easy to create. Although admittedly, if you don't have free build, you might struggle a little bit. You're not going to get these angle pieces, more so because you need to have free build to get those there. But everything else you can definitely build within the regular constraints of the game. Now, for me, going with this angled approach, I actually saw a really awesome photo on Pinterest of all places, because if you're ever looking for inspiration, Pinterest is your place to go. So after getting some really cool photos, kind of emulated that build overall and really like how it looked. Now, admittedly, we might have gone too far onto our brutalist style, so you're going to see a lot of just concrete, and I totally agree with you. I do go back through and add a little bit of a splash of color, some foliage, and it definitely helps out. Now, on top of that, you might have just seen me place down this really cool looking rock wall with like a rope barrier that's supporting all of the rubble. I did not make this. I am not going to take credit for this. And I actually don't even know who did make it, because I found the blueprint as part of a wider map and I just kind of pulled it all apart. And we're talking like a year ago when I first started playing Planet Zoo. And that begs the question, why do I do something like that? And I like to think that's how I improve. So if you're new at Planet Zoo, and I definitely know there's tons of new Planet Zoo players out there, don't be afraid or put out of sorts because you're seeing all these amazing builds. By no means am I saying that my build is amazing. I'm really happy with it, but there's always room for improvement. And I think that's one thing that I'm always going to tell everybody about. You can improve so much playing this game just by going back and trying new things. Now, I was saying that I found this really cool map, and they had this tunnel and it was supported by some rock, and I really liked the rock, so I kind of pulled everything apart, blueprinted it, and I saved it like a year ago, and it was to challenge myself to build it. I never got around to it, and then I found it in my blueprints. I was like, this is the perfect place to put this in here, and that's what we ended up with. Now, on top of that, you just saw me put together this really simple looking climbing structure. The idea behind this is I really wanted our leopards to be able to go and just lay in this tree on these platforms. They're quite large, so we have a large one in the bottom and a short one on the top. Kind of give you the idea that there's additional verticality within this habitat. And when you think about leopards, they're always going to be in trees. Thankfully, and you would have seen it at the very beginning, I might have gotten a few shots of our leopards actually lying around in the trees, which is super cool. That being said, you probably also noticed that this is not the final climbing structure I went with. I ended up going back through and rebuilding it all because I wanted something to be a little bit more realistic, and these logs are definitely not realistic when it comes to creating these platforms. So it actually worked out really well. I went back in and used some conservation wood to create the platforms. You'll see them in the final shots of the build. Now, I'm also making sure that we have tons of climbing structures available, and I was a little worried that we didn't have enough for our leopards, so I went in and added this really simple looking climbing structure, which is really just a platform. It's like a ramp going up to the top of this stone, and it adds a little bit of additional climbing verticality, I guess would be the best way of saying that, without necessarily creating these really tall and extravagant climbing structures, which, again, I will say this because I said this in a red panda habitat, climbing structures and me do not go together very well, but I like to think that every episode I'm learning, which again, that's always the intent behind this game. It's always to challenge yourself to improve and to build bigger and better than before. Now, if you made it this far in the episode, I really hope that you're enjoying what you're seeing, and maybe this is helping you to encourage you to go build and explore and try new things in Planet Zoo. That is always the intent. But if you've made it this far and you're liking what you see, think about subscribing. This really helps the channel to grow, which I always appreciate, but it also lets me know I'm doing a good thing, and it lets you know the next episode of Sakura Zoo or any other builds are available. So really cool, and it's really quick, and it's actually easy for you to do so. On top of that, if you're feeling up to it, hit that like button and even leave some comments. As normal with Sakura Zoo, you guys get to have a say in what goes on here and how our animals are named. So leave some name suggestions in the comments below. We actually need two, one male and one female name. I'm always looking forward to sharing your names, and I did not forget about our red panda. We do not have a quick visit to the red panda habitat today because I'm thinking in our next episode, we're going to do like an impromptu tour and kind of visit all of our habitats, see what the entire zoo looks like at this stage, because there's a lot that's happened on the back end that you may not have seen, and I really want to show it all off to you. On top of that, you also are encouraged to leave feedback on how I could have improved this particular build. A lot of the times when you build on Planet Zoo, you kind of get lost in the build itself, and this one took a really long time to put together. So if you're gonna maybe point out that I don't have any anti-climbing stuff on their front guest barrier, you would be correct. In my head, I'm gonna go with the hot wire that was definitely placed there off camera later in this episode. It doesn't actually get placed, but we're just gonna pretend that it's there. You'd be right. But maybe you have feedback on the foliage or the building. Maybe you wanted to see more of the building because actually there is no portion of the building on this one. Funny story, I accidentally left my recording software running and I filled up my entire hard drive of just my desktop, which really frustrating, surprisingly. But regardless, we are nearing the end of the episode, and really we are on that foliage stage. You've seen me placing tons of foliage. And I will be honest, normally I am a fan of ensuring that the foliage that we place in our habitat is foliage that is actually native to the habitat of the zoo or the animal. And in this case, you might be seeing me place down some buffalo grass, which is not native, but you can't have a zoo without some buffalo grass. So if you're fans of buffalo grass, let me know in the comments below. Who else likes to leave and place buffalo grass absolutely everywhere in their habitats, even when maybe they shouldn't? I am trying some different techniques and again, learning a lot from other content creators. Somebody who is fantastic at foliage, Jean Tide. You should definitely check out some of her videos because she is a master at building these really heavy foliage items. But I'm trying to learn from these creators as well, and I hope that you learn from me because that's ultimately, at the end of the day, my goal. Now, I've definitely mentioned this in the past, not a fan of empty habitats. I feel the need to fill everything up with foliage or rocks. In this case, you can see me placing down quite a few faux rocks. For me, it just adds a lot of additional flavor or variety to the builds. When I see just like an empty plot of land, it really bothers me. And I realize the game is actually meant to be a place like that. When you go and you look at zoos in real life, they're often fairly empty. I just don't like the texture of the grass, so I tend to go a little overboard when it comes to foliage. And you're kind of seeing me placing plants just absolutely everywhere, even pop in a tree here just to kind of add and obscure and hide a lot of the buildings. Now, we are at the end of the episode, but that doesn't mean that we're done here. I realize there's quite a bit here you didn't see come together, so instead, I'm really hoping you're going to enjoy some of these cinematic shots of this new area that we've added to Sakura Zoo. I'm really excited to show this off. A lot of work went into this after the fact. That's why it did take so long to get these episodes out, but I am over the moon with how this looks. That's it. That's all I got for you for this week. If you're really liking what you've seen, think about heading on over to our Discord. You get lots of behind the scenes looks, sneak peeks of the builds. You actually get a lot of a say in it. And if you're looking for a link, you can actually find one in the description below. Now that's it. That's all I have for you on today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you want to see more behind the scenes, like I said, head on over to our Discord. And as always, just thank you. Thank you for supporting me and supporting the channel. Could not have done it without you guys. Otherwise, I just want to end it off here by saying, as always, ciao for now. Hey everyone, my name's Gunther and welcome back to Sakura Zoo. We're back in the mountains of Asia. We're finally taking a look at our new Arctic fox habitat. If you watched our tour last week, you would have actually had a sneak peek as I was joined by Digital Blob to take a look at how Sakura Zoo is turning out. Now, if you really like the content and you want to show support for the channel, think about hitting that subscribe button. Otherwise, feel free to always leave a comment, let me know how I could have improved, and of course, hit that like button as well to show some love for these Arctic foxes. So we're going back with our tried and true process for this particular build, which is starting off with a lot of our rock work. And again, we're utilizing a lot of faux rock. It makes sense because we're focusing on the mountains of Asia and we're not in a mountainous area. So all of our rock work would have to be man-made. And this also gives us the opportunity to create some things that are pretty unique for this particular habitat. No way would we have seen these giant rock walls naturally form here. So utilizing faux rocks makes total sense. A lot of the inspiration for this build actually comes from the Lincoln Park Zoo, and specifically their polar bear habitat. And I realize we're not building for polar bears, but we definitely have a plan for polar bears pretty far in the future for Sakura Zoo. So we're downsizing everything, but the overall shape and size is going to kind of appear here. So if you've been to Lincoln Park Zoo and you see this habitat, let me know how I did. Now, the last thing I'm going to do before we start working on all of our foliage is we're just going to add a little bit of a divot here. And this is going to come into play later in the episode, but I want you to remember what we placed. With our faux rock recolored and some water added in, it's time for us to move on to the foliage stage of this build. I'm going to start off with adding in some trees, tried out a few things before once again landing on the Himalayan birch trees. I also thought about adding in the Himalayan pine trees. really like how they look before I stopped and opted to go for the Scots Pine. More so because I have a really small version that I really adore. I think it fits perfectly with this entire build. On top of that, I'm going to add in some aster and some caribou moss. Caribou moss is something I haven't really added in before, and you're probably going to say this looks really terrible having caribou moss right here, and I would 100% agree with you because we're going to get rid of it shortly. I also add in some bearberry bushes, Siberian pea shrubs. I prefer the darker version, but the flowered version does make a show up here as well. I also, for some reason, decided to add in a Planet Zoo log, which I kind of actually love how these logs look. Maybe it's because they're fake logs, and that just means that they're going to be a little bit more artistic. Of course, add in some additional alpine currant, wild hedgerows, lady fern, Labrador tea, and dog rose bushes. You're going to see all of this happen over the next few minutes. But I want to talk about the wild hedgerow for a second. This is probably one of my more versatile pieces. I love how it looks because it acts as a perfect screen. It also acts as a perfect way for you to kind of hide some additional things. And the perfect example would be this Planet Zoo log. Wasn't looking too good bare, so adding in some wild hedgerows to act as the base and then adding in a bunch of additional foliage on top of it really helped out. Now remember when I said that we would come back to this divot that I added into this habitat? There's a really good reason for this. For those who remember our Ottawa Zoo days, the first habitat I ever did was for the Arctic fox, and it was not a good habitat. I will be the first person to admit that. But there's one thing I learned from that experience, which is how much they don't like interacting with guests. They're a very shy animal. So the idea behind it is adding in this divot is a little area where they can hide from the guests. And the reality is guests are still going to be able to see them here, but they may not. So it's going to act as a little bit of a barrier for them to go and hang out while still being outdoors. And that was the idea behind it. I love how it worked. And at the end of the day, as long as I'm happy with it, that's all that really matters. And I want you guys to remember that for your builds as well. As long as you're happy with it, that's all that matters. Now I'm trying something a little different for this habitat as well, which is a double barrier. Never really done double barriers, but again, in my effort to make sure that I'm marrying the use of normal barriers with custom-made barriers, it's a perfect example and a perfect time to do this. I'm going to say I was truly inspired by Nausicaa. She took us on a tour of her amazing zoo, which hopefully you guys will see soon. And I really loved how she did some of her double barriers, and I'm kind of stealing the idea. And I really like how it turned out, which again, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. The last stage from a foliage perspective, it's just going to be some terrain paint. I always struggle with terrain paint, so I'm still learning, but I like to think that I'm getting better and better with every episode. And again, that's all that matters, as long as you can improve. The last section of this video is just going to be the interior, which I'm really happy with how this turned out because I think this married the entire idea of having a mountains of Asia with all of these traditional Asian style buildings buried into the mountains. And I love the concept and the look of how this turned out. You can't go wrong with it. So you are going to see a lot of this happen, some trial and error here, playing around with a lot of the sizes and the shapes. I'm trying to make it work around this very awkward angle that I've created with our entrance to the backstage. And there are some pretty cool things happening with our backstage as well, which will be the lion's share of the last half of the portion of this video. Now, I am not a fan of creating roofs that are really large and empty. It's a struggle for me to keep them looking enticing, and I don't like flat surfaces. I don't like empty surfaces. They are the worst thing to do. So to help fill that in, I added in some additional tiers to the building as well, which again just goes to show how much it can improve by adding an additional elevation. As Digital Blob once said, elevation is everything, and that also applies to buildings themselves as well. And I gotta say, the sightline for this particular building looks amazing as well, so you can't go wrong. The last stage of the video is actually going to be our backstage den area, and I'm going to do something I've never really done before, and I'm super excited to show this off to you, which is we're going to create some really unique little denning boxes. Now, when I say unique little denning boxes, I realize they are not denning boxes. I actually don't even know the word best to describe this, but it's part of the joy of playing games and having fun is just learning new things, and I think this is a perfect example of this. I didn't really have a whole lot of inspiration for this. In fact, I actually lack a lot of inspiration when it comes to creating backstage den areas. Oftentimes, I don't know how to marry having a habitat going into the backstage den. I have a few ideas that always kick around in the back of my head, but I always struggle with this. And so this is going to be my interpretation of it. Of course, there's going to be a lot of trial and error here because we're learning on the go. But I think the end product definitely works out really well here. More so because there's gonna be some really cool ideas. But I'm gonna settle on this half painted brick wall, half mesh wall. And that really means we need to create a little bit of a framework for all of our mesh and our doors that we're gonna add in. Now, speaking of doors, this is gonna be the fun part. I struggle with creating realistic looking backstage doors, which is part of the reason why you see me always rely on the glass doors and then utilizing a lot of the wall trim to kind of piece it all together. Now, the idea behind creating this monstrosity was to have a way for our staff to interact with the foxes in a controlled environment. Really didn't want to have them just walking into the habitat and not having a place where they could maybe have the Arctic foxes retreat to. We don't want to necessarily have a lot of interaction if we can avoid it. So created these boxes, and that makes perfect sense. But we also need to add some doors for our staff to have access to these areas. And I don't want to go with just something that's going to look faux or unrealistic. So I figured, why not utilize the habitat doors? But there's a struggle with this. And for those who play Planet Zoo for a really long time, you can only have one habitat door on a barrier. So I ended up creating 2 mini barriers and then adding the doors in. And while it was a struggle to make it work, I gotta say this really elevates the entire build, and this might be a whole new way that I create backstage areas for all of my zoos. So that's my piece of, that's my tip of the day, if you will, on how to create some really cool looking backstage areas. Do with it as you will, but I really hope this helps to challenge you to build some pretty cool things as well. Now, we are getting to the end of the video and we're almost done with this build, but there was one thing I realized when it came to this painted brick half wall, and it was the texture on the top looked really weird. So I went with some classic roof trim to kind of cover it up. And there's a reason why I went with classic roof trim and not something I would normally go with. And it's actually this piece right here. It is the smallest wood piece that's available in the game as far as I know. And there's over like 1,000 pieces, so I might be wrong on that. But I love how versatile it can be. So I placed it here and then colored it black, and it actually worked out really well. But it allowed me to work around this really tight angle, which I can appreciate because that's always a struggle when it comes to using wood pieces. That's all I have for today's episode. It's a little bit of a shorter one, and for those who don't know, I've actually been fighting the flu for the past week, and I've lost my voice at one point. I've lost my hearing, so I might be yelling right now, and if I am, I'm so sorry. I do apologize. But we are going to get back to regular schedule as well. At the time of this video, it is also really close to the holidays, so I just want to take a second and to wish all of you guys a fantastic Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and just want to say thank you so much for supporting the channel and supporting me as well. I've grown so much in 2024, and I could not have done that without you guys, and I don't know where I would have been without the support and all of the help that you've had and you've shared with me over the last year to help me improve in Planet Zoo. When I started this, I didn't know what I was going to achieve, and to see where I am now really is just something I was truly unexpected about, and I thank everybody who's been part of the community to help me get here as well. Speaking of the community, I want to say we have a Discord. If you want to join, you're always welcome to do so. Otherwise, think about hitting that subscribe button, lets me know I'm doing a good job, and of course, leave some feedback. Tell me how I could have improved, or if maybe you learned a new technique on this episode. Otherwise, we're always in desperate need for some names for our Arctic foxes, so leave some suggestions in the comments below. So I'm going to leave you here with some final cinematic shots of our build. I just want to say again, thank you so much for all of your support, and as always, ciao for now. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sakura Zoo. Today it's all about the Japanese macaque with this really cool multi-tiered, multi-pool of water habitat, which is a really weird thing to say, but we're here to see how this all came together. And we're going to start off with our multi-tier water feature. This is actually going to be the first water feature. You're going to see something else pop up a little bit later, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But this took a little bit to kind of figure out. Originally, I'd gone with some higher water tiers or water features, but realized that the guests just wouldn't be able to see it, and I really want to make sure that we're going to take in a lot of elevation and rock work with this particular habitat. So please bear with me as you see a ton of faux rock being placed just about everywhere. But I gotta say, this habitat was a fun experience, really focusing on creating this water world habitat that the Japanese macaques can go and explore. Very similar to what you see in real life, or all those photos of, the Japanese macaque hanging out in a hot water pool and then just, the steam coming up around it. So that was really the inspiration for this particular build. And this, I'm just really happy that it came together. Now, if you were in the Discord, you would have seen my paper drawing of how this was all coming together, and I will say we're pretty true to the original intent behind this. The idea overall is to have a ton of elevated areas for our Japanese macaques to go and explore. So as a guest, when you're looking in, you're going to see them high, you're going to see them low, and you're just going to see them just about everywhere. But with the majority of the base rock work placed down, and I realize it's weird saying base rock work, but there's still so much more that has to happen here. I figured it was time for us to kind of outline where the barrier is going to go. Again, we're utilizing the same barrier, trying to keep with the theme of this entire area, because again, it is the mountains of Asia. And speaking of the mountains of Asia, we only have one more habitat to go after this. But I'm also feeling like we need to put in some support facilities, not for our staff, but rather for our guests. So stay tuned for some updates about that as well. Now, with the majority of work done, I did realize there was one thing I forgot, which was how was I going to go about and make sure that the Japanese macaques are not going to escape? So I just borrowed that concrete post that I created for our Amur leopards, brought them over here, and it worked really well. Although I did take it off of the white and made it a little bit darker color, kind of matching the stone. Now, normally at this stage of the video, it's all about foliage work. This is like a tried and true method, but I'm calling this the oops-a-daisy phase, because the majority of the work you're going to see is just not sticking around. And I will admit, I struggled significantly at this stage of this build. But the reason why I'm keeping it here is so that everybody who can see, especially for all those new players out there, that it's okay. Your first attempt at a build may not work out really well, and that's totally cool. It's totally normal. Sometimes you just need to delete it and start again. You also may have seen me try to, once again, add in some caribou moss. Still can't figure out where to place this in the game, and I still don't know if I'm ever going to have a chance to use it. So you can see the end product, and it's looking pretty rough around the edges, and I just wasn't really happy with it. So I decided to focus on some other portions of this particular build. And one of the things I really wanted to challenge myself to do was to create this really cool looking barrier, this net barrier that would go over the top of the habitat. The design behind it is to prevent any of our Japanese macaques from hopping over the glass and things like that. And I struggled really hard to create this, and I think that my skill set is just not quite there yet to make it happen. So instead, I just opted to increase the glass an additional few meters higher and called it a day. Also, tried and true method, I took some mulch, placed it between all of our hedgerows and the rest of the glass pieces. This just helps to kind of blend in all that grass tone, gives it a little bit of a cleaner look as well. And again, those hedgerows, love how they work out, and pretty sure I've used this in almost every single habitat in Sakura Zoo. So with our oops-a-daisy phase out of the way, I turned to the rest of the community and kind of asked for some help and some ideas on how I can make this habitat pop just a little bit more. And I got tons of feedback, and again, this is why the entire Planet Zoo community is just absolutely fantastic. And one of the top things of feedback that somebody provided me was maybe adding in an additional pool of water at the very front of our habitat. And this actually is a fantastic idea, and I can't believe I didn't think of it as well. So I decided to go back through and add in a little bit more of a man-made pool of water. And you can kind of see how I did this. I took all of the faux rock, specifically the square archways, placed it, rotated it around a little bit, and picked some of the square blocks and added it on top. Just kind of layered it all the way around. I created one piece and then just copied it all the way along. And while it doesn't look a tad generic and repetitive, it does add so much more to this particular habitat. And thankfully, also means from a foliage perspective, we don't need to do a whole lot. And I think that's why it's important that it's okay to not like the first attempt at a build. Sometimes your second, third, or even fourth attempt is going to be that much better. It's also finally time for us to finally work on all of our foliage, and we're actually going to keep the majority of this foliage in place. Tons of different bushes are going to go in, but the majority of the time we're focusing on the correct biome and continent for our Japanese macaques, which in this case is taiga, temperate, and in Asia, of course. A lot of tried and true techniques that you've seen me kind of plays around here quite a bit, but I gotta say these Scots pines are fantastic, and having that one just poke out over top of some of the pools of water really kind of sealed the deal. Now, when you think about Japanese macaques, you immediately think about all of them hanging out in hot springs in the winter weather. And while right now it's not winter, we definitely can do a little bit of a hot spring effect. It's super easy as well, just 2 steps. Number 1, you're going to adjust the color of your water. I made it a little bit lighter blue and I've toned down the transparency. Number 2, I maxed out the mist effect, and it gives you that amazing steam look, so it really does look like we're sitting into, or staring rather, into some hot springs. It's a perfect place for some Japanese macaques, and when you add snow to this entire effect, it just adds so much more to the overall build. Now, you might have missed it. I once again tried to add in some of that caribou moss. Again, I'm still struggling. I probably will never find a home for this. But our foliage is really starting to come together. Not too many climbing areas just yet, and you're gonna see we're gonna do a final pass at the end of the video, and we're gonna really make the exterior pop a little bit more. But right now, it's all about color, and you can see that I also use some of the leaf litter, really just to add a splash of orange to this overall build. We were looking rather dull with a lot of gray and green, so adding in that orange leaf litter really made everything pop. Now, before we go any further in this build, I think it's the perfect time for us to go and step back and take a look at our previous build, which was for the Arctic foxes. Now, for those who remember, we always love to get feedback from the community and to have you guys leave your mark on our builds. So I want to say thank you to DocDoc4500 for the fantastic name suggestion of Nectarine. So we have one name, so I'm going to go with that same theme, and we're going to call the other one Clementine. So we have Nectarine and Clementine. I'm really happy to welcome them to our zoo. But it's not just about the Arctic foxes today. Our Japanese macaques definitely need some names, and we have a small colony. We only have 8, but those are a ton of names that we need. So this is your opportunity to leave your mark on Sakura Zoo as well. So in the comments below, make sure you leave some name suggestions. And you don't have to come up with 8. If you want to come up with a theme in a few of them, you are more than welcome to do so. And I can't wait to see some of your suggestions in the comments. Now, getting back to our Japanese macaque habitat, it is time for us to start working on our interior backstage area, and there's nothing too fancy. You're going to see this kind of coming together, following a very similar method, which is some painted brick, adding in some cladding material, and then just really kind of making this look a little bit more like a monkey habitat. And I'm taking a lot of inspiration from my time at Toronto Zoo, because I actually had the opportunity to see into one of their den areas, and this is really what kind of inspired this. But I think now is the perfect time to remind everybody that if you like what you're seeing in Sakura Zoo, think about subscribing. It definitely helps me, lets the channel grow, lets me know I'm doing a good job, and on top of that, hit that like button, because that is also a really easy way for you to help this video reach out to some more people. On top of that, I do want to take a moment to just wish everybody a fantastic New Year's. This video should be coming out right before the New Year's, so this might be the last you hear from me until the year 2025, which is weird saying, but it's just around the corner. So I just want to say thank you so much for all of your support and everybody who helped out this year in Planet Zoo and in this channel. I really don't think I could have ever achieved this without your support, and I just want to say thank you so much to everybody. Now, speaking of leaving your mark on Sakura Zoo, there is one thing that I haven't announced, and this is going to be the first time I'm going to announce it, but there is another way for you to leave your mark on Sakura Zoo. I've always shared that the goal for me was to create this really cool, realistic zoo, and it's not just about the zoo, it's also about the environment and the surrounding area. So, I'm coming to you guys for your help. I really need some buildings that will act as the skirt for the entire zoo. And I really want to have you guys build these buildings so they can be Japanese style. They have to be Japanese style, But the idea behind it is you can make houses, you can make apartment blocks, anything like that. And then just all you have to do is share me the link to your build, and I will add it in. Your name is going to be placed on each of the buildings, so everybody will get the recognition that they deserve. And this is also your way of leading Mark on Sakura Zoo and showing how you have helped to develop something truly amazing. So if you really want to participate in this, all you have to do is keep an eye out for the community post. We'll announce this to everybody. But if you want to get a head start on it, you can actually head on over to our Discord. Just leave the link there for us as well, and I will be adding all of your builds, or as many as I can, into Sakura Zoo. So this is your opportunity to truly leave your mark on Sakura Zoo and this build forever. So thank you so much. I can't wait to see what you guys put together. Now, with our backstage finally out of the way, it's time for us to do one last pass over the exterior and the front of our habitat. And really, the goal is to add in a few more climbing apparatuses, so we're just adding in some logs just about anywhere. The idea is just to give them a few other ways to traverse all of this terrain, and it also adds a little bit more realism, I like to think, to this overall build. Now, off camera, I am going to go back through and add in quite a few steps. You can already see I've done some on the left-hand side there, but this is probably one of my crowning achievements for this entire build. I'm shocked that this actually worked out, because according to the game, it does not. But it worked out, and you can't go wrong. So I placed down 3 faux rocks, the 2 smaller ones, 1 larger one that looked a little bit more realistic. And inside of those, I placed in the hot water tap. And the idea behind this was it was meant to really get the Japanese macaques to come and hang out in the water and under these flowing water tubes. And they kind of give you that idea that, again, these macaques are actually in a hot water spring. And it worked out fantastic. And at the very beginning of the video, you would have actually seen some of this happen. And I can't believe we were able to achieve this. Now, I did notice that the overall build was kind of looking a little bland. So I went in and added in a few more of the East Asian pieces, as well as some of these blocks. And it really helped to add a little bit more visual appearance to the overall build. I especially like adding the monkey into the hot spring as well. I thought it was super fitting. And the last thing, and this is actually the first time I've ever done this, I took some of these timber pieces, placed them into the wall a little bit, added a little bit of a splash of color, and pretty much ended the entire build. That was the best way to go about it. And that's it. That's all I have for this episode. I am going to show off some of the work that went into creating a little bit more of a skirt around the habitat, because again, there's not too many habitats that are in the mountains of Asia, but we are getting near the end. But I just want to say thank you so much for your joining me on this journey and seeing how this all came together. I can't wait to hear some of your feedback on maybe what I could have done differently, or maybe if this inspired you to build your own things as well. So I really hope it does. As always, thank you so much for your support, and stay tuned, because you're going to see some cinematic shots. And I'm also going to add in some winter shots so we can actually see what this Japanese macaque habitat would look like with all the snow on the ground as well. Again, just want to say thank you so much for your support, and as always, ciao for now. Hey everyone, my name's Gunther, and welcome back to the Mountains of Asia, where today we focused on creating our final habitat for the snow leopard. I'm really excited to kind of just show this off and to finally say goodbye to the Mountains of Asia from a habitat perspective before we move on to something bigger and better than ever before. Now, the build. A lot of this inspiration, once again, surprisingly, came from Pinterest. And the idea behind this is I really want to have some jagged rocks acting as the backdrop of our habitat. And if you were part of our stream last weekend, you actually would have seen us kind of put this together really quickly. And I say really quickly, but it definitely does take a lot of time. But for the first time ever, a lot of the things that went into this particular build, they're actually blueprints, which might explain why this build went so fast. Now, the caveat to this is a lot of the blueprints, actually, in fact, all of the blueprints from this particular build, they're my blueprints. None of them are on the workshop because I just don't think that they're quite there just yet. And that doesn't mean that they won't be added to the workshop. But for me, the focus has always been about creating new blueprints for myself and challenging myself to improve and build bigger than ever before. Now, does that mean I don't take inspiration from blueprints? No, I get a lot of inspiration from pre-existing blueprints, but the idea behind it is it helps me to improve and build it even bigger and just kind of gain some new skills. So for that end, pretty much everything in this zoo is actually my blueprint with the exception of all of those signs from the lion pack, which if you haven't downloaded it, you should definitely do so because it just elevates your zoo so much more. Now let's talk a little bit about the habitat, because I've flown through this like I said. We are focusing on creating a 2-tier habitat for our snow leopard. A lot of these pieces will be reused from other habitat builds, but that kind of makes sense. If you have something that works, why would you create something new again? But as I mentioned, 2 tiers. The top tier is going to be really where they can kind of take a break from all of our guests. They can kind of get a little bit of a hidden away from home section. We've also added in a little covered den for them. Now this is going to be their exterior den. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to hang out up here, but I like the idea of giving them a small sheltered place. So if there's any inclement weather or anything like that, they can go in there and hide. On top of that, we have lots of walk work and terrain work, so to help make sure that they can get access and give them a few other different avenues of access, we're adding in a few climbing structures. Now, weirdly enough, the snow leopard actually doesn't require any climbing structures with PZ+. I don't know if that's actually a requirement in the regular base game, so I was kind of off-put by this, and I realized I don't have to add in any climbing structures, but I felt that I needed to do this just to make sure that they have some of those options. And who wouldn't want to see some type of leopard, whether the snow leopard or whatever, go and explore and hang out on some of these nice, really cool looking climbing structures. So to that end, just some basic pathing for them to kind of explore. All right, so we've gotten some of the interior set up, but it's time that we really focus on creating the boundary of our habitat, because it's kind of hard to build when you don't really know what you can build within. It's pretty easy to do so. Now, normally from a barrier perspective, and you've seen me build these 100 times, it's really focused on just creating something pretty basic. And this time I wanted to build something a little bit more fun. So to that end, I went with this concrete window barrier, and it's one-way glass. I really want to give all of these snow leopards some privacy, and what better way to do that than with some one-way glass? Now I'm going to use some of the wood beams to act as the base. This is going to hold all of the glass in place. And then I also took some of these plastic pieces and placed them all along the edges, colored them black, and this kind of gives it that idea of a rubber gasket seal, just going to prevent any water from seeping into the windows. Super easy, very basic, and we've created our windows. Now the really cool thing is that we can pivot these any way we want, and we can create some really cool, interesting designs. And I think this is a perfect example of the importance of creating your boundaries, because I definitely need to move some of these rocks to make room for all of our barriers. Now you probably said, hey, the snow leopards are going to be able to get out of those mountains. And you're 100% right. So in order to make sure that they can't escape, we're going to utilize some more of these concrete wall pieces. More so because we can use the corner pieces to create some really cool designs. And I know in the past I've really focused on creating and utilizing some of the pre-existing barrier pieces. Today, wanted to do something a little bit different. And again, it's all in the effort of exploring and enjoying doing new things. Off camera, and you would have seen this at the very beginning as well, I also added in the rough outline of our building, and you'll see more of that pop up later in the episode. Now, with everything kind of set up, we know where we can build within. It's time for us to work on the foliage, and really rocks and bushes are how you're going to make your habitat pop. All of our rock work for the majority of the time is done, and for the first time ever, I've actually managed to add in caribou moss to our build. I don't know if this took maybe 4 habitats to find a place for some caribou moss, but I did it, and I'm happy. I feel like I've accomplished something in 2025 already. Now, I mentioned that a lot of the build pieces from this particular habitat are actually coming from all these other habitats that I built, and this climbing structure is no different, but I wanted to shake it up a little bit, and I totally forgot to add this. So I'm going to utilize some of these drapery pieces and color that a solid color, and I'll leave it there. It's almost like it's a blanket for all of our snow leopards to play around with. Alright, so this next part's kind of hard for me to explain why I did it. I struggle with empty spaces in my builds. I really don't like them, and you can use foliage and stuff like that to fill it in, but I tried something a little different this time. I went with some rock plateaus, and really the idea behind it is it's to add texture to the overall build. And I think this is a really cool job of doing that. Now for some additional variation, I took the rubble pieces from the temple packs and threw them in there as well. I realize that doesn't make sense, but when you look at it mixed in with all of the faux rocks, it definitely works out. And it's the same thing for this pathway up to the upper section. It looked pretty empty having such an open space there, so taking some rocks, placing them on the side, and putting them in there with some foliage really helped to seal the deal on this particular build. Now I will admit as well, we're kind of getting a little bland from the color scheme, so I added in some autumn leaf litter, and the orange really helps to create a little bit of a splash of color throughout the build. Now we're just halfway through the build, and that means it's time for us to take a little bit of a quick trip over to our Japanese macaque habitat. And as is normal, our community gets to name all of our animals, and this one comes from Weltmart from Reddit, who suggested Anpan, Mochi, Castella, Dango, Taiyaki, Daifuku, Kakagori, and Senbei. These are all names that fit so well because the majority of our names in our habitat so far have been food-based, and I felt that that was the best way to go about it. But I do want to say thank you to everybody who submitted their names because they were all fantastic. I loved every single one of them, and it was really hard to choose names for this particular batch of Japanese macaques. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have the option to choose some names for our new snow leopards. We have 2 today to pick some names for, and maybe they should be food related because a lot of the names have been food related. So in the comments below, make sure you leave a comment just letting me know what names you are suggesting for our new snow leopards. So the majority of our build is complete, and it's time for us to focus on the backstage. And I'm really kind of showing a lot of this backstage off because I'm so proud of what we've accomplished. More so because a lot of this stuff that went into this, we built on stream. So all those blueprints finally came to a head. We were able to use them the way they were meant to be used, and I loved how they turned out. Now this backstage is a little different because we've never built this particular style of backstage, which is giving 2 airlocks to get into our dens. So these are the interior dens, as well as some support buildings that are going to help our staff to work with all of our snow leopards. So I have a little bit of a trick for this one. You might have already noticed this entire backstage area is not being built where it's supposed to be built, which is in the habitat. We're actually building it outside the habitat. And the idea behind it is it allows me to work within the constraints that is the global axis so that I can make sure everything's going to flow in nice and neat and we're not going to have to fight with any of the axis problems and stuff like that. And that's the idea of creating some little templates for you to know where you're going to place your buildings, because it was very easy just to slide it out, adjust it, and slide it back in. And it worked out really well. In fact, I'm actually super proud of this because everything is like exactly mirrored between the 2 dens so that it looks perfect. And I don't know, maybe it's just something about seeing something that is mirrored correctly that works so well. And I think this is a perfect example. Now let's talk blueprints for 2 seconds. I want to say thank you to everybody who joined the live stream last week to help with me creating these blueprints, because you can see we're finally using them the way they're meant to be used. And I would not have been able to build them without you guys' help. So thank you so much for being part of that live stream and helping me to do this. And you can see we're using them the exact same way that we want to use them, which is as a modular design. So we can just piece them in wherever we want. And that's the idea of creating blueprints. And even better, these are my blueprints, and I'm super excited about that. So with some quick blueprints added in, I'm pretty much done with the backstage area. I do slide it back in, you can see it off in the distance there, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Now the last build for this episode is actually going to be a pretty fun one because it's our first sunshade for all of Sakura Zoo. And if you know me, sunshades are something I love to build. I actually absolutely love sunshades, and this one comes from our Discord. So thank you to Samasaurus, who provided this inspirational photo, and everybody who made fun of me saying that I was going to build something because it was a sunshade. And you're right, you know me too well. I did build it because it is a sunshade. Now I'm really excited with how this turned out because I challenged myself to do something differently, which is why I loved how this turned out. Specifically, utilizing these Planet Zoo anchor pieces and then adding some wires act as the support needed to hold all of these arms up, which are going to hold all the glass for our sunshade in place as well. Now I realize, realistically, when you see the final product of this sunshade, I was looking at it the other day and I was like, oh, that's not going to do a lot of work when it's raining. Because it's not. It's going to push all that rain into the center. So whoever's sitting under the sunshade, you might want to leave when it rains, but that's a redesign issue for another day. But that's it. With this final build, we're pretty much done this entire area, and I really love how it kind of turned out. Now, if you were listening earlier, I did say that this was the final habitat of the mountains of Asia, but it's not the final build. We do have to build some guest amenities for this area. In fact, we need to build guest amenities for our zoo because we actually don't have any, and as you can see, our rating for our zoo is only 2.5 stars because a lot of our guests are unhappy with the amenities. We need to add in some food and drinks and whatnot, and I think I have the perfect area to do that, and it's going to give us one last little trip to the mountains of Asia. But that's it. We're pretty much at the end of the episode. And as normal, you're going to see some cinematic shots of the full build, and I do encourage you to take a look because a lot of the things that I put in place didn't quite necessarily make it into the video, and it wasn't because I accidentally forgot to record, I promise you. Or maybe it was, who knows. Now, if you like this build, or if you like the direction of Sakura Zoo, think about hitting the subscribe button. It's going to let you know the next time I upload, and traditionally I upload weekly. But on that note, I do want to say we're not going to be just doing uploads anymore. 2025 is a year of new experiences, new things. So you're going to see a monthly stream where we work on some things within Sakura Zoo that wouldn't normally make it into the build itself. And if you really want to participate and leave your mark on the zoo itself, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment with the names for our 2 new snow leopards. Otherwise, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, watching this video, and as always, ciao for now. Hey everyone, welcome back to Sakura Zoo. My name's Gunther, and thanks for joining me on this journey. Today is a very special episode because it is the final episode of our Mountains of Asia area. That's right, we've built 4 habitats that I am over the moon with how they've turned out, and the one thing we were missing were just some guest facilities, and we can definitely see that in our zoo rating. Sitting at just below 3 stars, it's not good enough for us, so it's time for us to take care of some guests as opposed to animals today. Now, it's not just about the build today. We do have some channel announcements that I'm really excited to chat about. We'll bring that up a little bit later in this episode. Now, this build, you're already seeing something that's very familiar to what we've built in one of our first episodes for Sakura Zoo, and in this case, it's a new and updated adobe wall. And you can see, we've definitely changed the style for this particular wall. Again, like normal, focusing on plaster as the base, but from a wood perspective, we're utilizing the Twilight board pieces. And I gotta say, these pieces are fantastic when it comes to building our adobe walls, and huge shout out to Simply Zoological who helped give me that idea as well. The concept for this entire build is creating a courtyard for our guests to go and access all of their services, so in this case food, drink, and some restrooms. And the idea behind it is keeping in the theme of the mountains of Asia, but going for something a little bit more interesting. In this case, kind of going like a temple wall or a temple courtyard. Originally, the concept was to create a mountain village, but I found that this worked out really well because it blocks a lot of the sight lines because, again, this is the end of our zoo area. Now, we are also focusing on bringing in a lot of natural sunlight, so there's not going to be as much heavy foliage or cut overhangs. Really, we're just having this one area created here. This is just going to help to transport our guests from one section to the other. There was one unanticipated consequence of creating these walls and trying to go something a little bit more unique, and it was this rather large open area just before entering into the courtyard. And I didn't want to put a lot of foliage. There's so much foliage in this area. I didn't really want to kind of lean on that, so instead I opted to create this ornamentation building. And I call it an ornamentation building because it literally has no use, except for just being something that's pretty cool looking. Again, very similar in style to our walls that we've just created. We're utilizing a lot of the Twilight door planks and door pieces to create the base of our building, and then just layering things on top of that. That means adding in some additional smaller pieces to act as the bridge between the bottom and the top, adding in some windows, and then utilizing, for the first time ever, might I add, the East Asian doorway, which, now that I can color it, because I didn't realize that, again, a downside of not playing around with the pieces too much, looks so much better when I color it to match the walls. One of the last steps to make this really pop is just adding in some decals, specifically moss and grunge. Now the moss is going to be colored slightly different. We're going to go with a more brown color after the fact. But adding this in, and then for the grunge, making it match the color of the plaster, really kind of gives it that more weathered look. I'm going to cap it off as well with some additional foliage. I realize I just said I didn't want a whole lot of foliage, but what I mean by that is I don't want a large foliage rock taking its place. And those Scotch pines really seal the deal, as well as these creosote bushes, which I realize are not native, but we're going to allow it to happen. And this is the final result. You can see how well this looks. Now that I've actually had that first design, it's also time to add in some additional buildings. So we're not going to go over this in too much detail, with the exception of this rather unique design. You can see that there's 3 tiers to the walls here. The idea behind it was just to add some additional variation to the builds because, again, we don't want to have everything look the exact same. We want to make things that look a little bit more unique and more in-depth. So to that end, I went with these 3-tier walls. Now, I say 3-tier, but the wall on the right is going to adjust. We're going to add in some glass pieces at the top, but altogether, it still looks fantastic and, again, adds quite a bit of variation. You can see as well the roof tiles don't match the wall tiles, but I'm okay with that. It's a minor detail. But in the end, you can see how well this building pops. Again, all of those decals doing a lot of heavy lifting for this overall build. Now we are getting into the foliage for this particular build as well, and I realize I say that it's a courtyard, there shouldn't be any foliage, but when I looked at a lot of reference photos for temple courtyards, things like that, I saw all these really cool foliage plots, so tried to emulate that within this particular build as well. And again, just going with some abstract designs, you can kind of see me playing around with it, struggling just a little bit, but that's the norm for Planet Zoo. When are you not struggling when it comes to building certain things? I feel like that's part of like the rite of passage of playing Planet Zoo. I'm laying out some additional foliage plots as well. The idea behind this is just to give us some variation throughout the courtyard. We want to have some greenery here, we just don't want it to be overpowering. And you can see that I use some Zen pebbles in the back just to kind of bridge some of these plots together. This just avoids me having to place down a lot of foliage or mulch where people can't really see it. The other thing is just adding in some cypress trees. Really love how they look. You've seen them in the beginning of the zoo, so I figured I'd bring them back here. Okay, so we can see this vision becoming reality. Our courtyard is becoming real, and it's time to add in some foliage onto our foliage plots. And we're going to start off with the Himalayan birch trees, really going for that windswept look. It has to be one of my favorite trees to play around with. I'm going to add in some creosote bushes as well, some bramble, and then you're going to see me use some Campion moss rocks. The idea behind the Campion moss rocks is just really to add a splash of color, because we're looking for those flowers, but also to add some rocks. What kind of foliage point has no rocks? You saw me slip in some crowberry there. I did try to add in some cowberry bushes as well, but we'll see how that works out. Hostas, which are something, it's actually the first time I think I've used hosta bushes. Hawthorn and blackthorn also make their way into this particular build. Not a whole lot, really just going for the different colors to add a little bit of variation. Some common saltwort, which is a criminally underrated bush, some bouteille flowers, and lastly, some pea shrub bushes. The foliage is pretty much complete, but I did talk about the oops-a-daisy moment in my last episode, and I'm going to share an oops-a-daisy moment in this particular video, and you can kind of see it. All those walls look super crisp and clean. We're missing all the decals. It did mean that I went and spent like 2 hours adding decals to all of these walls to give it a little bit more of a weathered look, but it definitely paid off. But like I said, oops-a-daisy moments. Oops-a-daisy moments happen all the time, and it's part of the joy, or not the joy, depending on how you look at it, of playing Planet Zoo. And you can see the final result here, everything's starting to pop. One of the other pieces of feedback that I got as well were to add in some of these leaf litter pieces to give it a little bit more of an interesting look, because a lot of leaves have fallen here, they've been brushed up to the side and whatnot, and it really pops. I will say I do replace some of the Himalayan birch trees with some Japanese maple trees, just so that we have the correct trees that are going to leave all of this leaf litter. And you can see the final product here. Now, before we get any further in this episode, I just want to take a moment to say, if you're really liking the episode, if you want to show support for the channel, think about hitting that like button and even telling me your own oops-a-daisy moment in the comments below. Otherwise, if you're feeling up to it, think about hitting that subscribe button, but as always, there's no pressure to do so. I think now is also the perfect time to share the latest channel announcement. I'm very excited to announce the Gaming Corner. That's right, memberships have been enabled for the channel for those who would like to support me. There are 2 tiers. There's Guest for those who would just like to show their support for the zoo and the channel, and Keeper, who will have even more say in how we shape not just our zoos and builds, but also what's next for the channel through member polls and additional behind-the-scenes updates. Now, we do need a way to show off our members each episode, and what better way than through a supporter wall. This also doubles as a great centerpiece for our courtyard, and I like to call that 2 birds with 1 cone. Our supporter wall also requires 2 additional names, one for Sparrow838 and one for Simply Zoological. Thank you to both of you for supporting the channel, and I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to work with you on creating new and amazing things. That is the extent of our channel update for today. I really hope that you've liked this episode, that you've seen some really cool techniques, and maybe this helps you to improve your own builds or do new and amazing things. And if you do, head on over to our Discord, share your builds, and let me know what you've done, because it's a great way for new and old players alike to come and talk about more things Planet Zoo. If you've just stumbled across this episode and made it all the way to the end, and this is the first time you've seen Sakura Zoo, think about hitting that subscribe button, because it'll let you know the next time I have an episode or a live stream. Otherwise, I'm going to leave you guys here with some cinematic shots of our beautiful visitor center. And I just want to say again, thank you so much. And as always, ciao for now.